Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm seeing the attendees and participants are joining the call right now. So let's give them a few more minutes so that we could have everyone ready on the webinar and we could start today's session. For those who are here, my name is Valerie Karoa Bungo and I work at the Amahoro Coalition. And I'd really like to thank you all for taking the time to be here with us and to have this discussion with us. So quick housekeeping as we wait for everyone else to join in on the call. I'll be your host for today. I will be keeping an eye together with my colleagues in the back end and the chat function on Zoom here. Feel free to share any comments, any questions you may have to the presenters and the panelists that we have lined up for you today, and we'll be sure to channel those to them during the respective times. So thank you once again. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed today's session. Great, so I think we do have quite a bit of quorum now and we could jump into today's session. For those of you who just joined, my name is Valerie Karua Wabungo, and welcome to today's virtual event centered around the theme of social impact in Africa and the company of the future. Together with our host organization, the UNHCR, we really like to thank you all for joining in this conversation from your offices, your living rooms all over the world. We'll start today's session with an introduction from Isaac Kwaku-Foucault, who is the co-founder of the Amahoro Coalition, as well as the Leaders Council member. So Isaac, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Valerie. And a big thank you for everyone for making the time to join us today for this conversation. As Valerie said, my name is Isaac Kwaku-Foucault Jr. I am one of the founders of the Amahoro Coalition, and we are very honored to have you today for this very important conversation. I guess I'd just like to open by, acknowledging what is happening today in the world, especially with respect to displaced communities and how, overnight, the lives of innocent people can be upended through no fault of their own. We've all seen on television and on the media what's going on in Pakistan over the last couple of weeks, over the last week or so. The lives of many innocent men, women, and children being upended over something that they have little to do with. And I think increasingly, the decisions of a few or the decisions of governments, etc., affect the life of innocent individuals in a way that can be very jarring and quite traumatic. And I think that brings us to the importance of this conversation. I think in Africa is a very interesting case study when it comes to the conversation around refugees and displaced communities. The African continent represents about 16% of global population, but yet we are also representative of 45% of people who are individuals who are displaced come from the African continent. And that ratio is quite significant. In many refugee camps in Africa, and some of this conversation I'm preaching to the converted, and I think it bears mentioning, for many refugees camps in Africa, some of these camps have existed for over 2 decades, dramatically disrupting the lives of people, their livelihoods, and future generations. I think we all will also agree that traditional modes of aid and traditional modes of engagement, and even the best will of government, etc., isn't enough, isn't sufficient to meet the needs of these individuals who, especially in Africa, end up in a protracted situation, as I said, up to 2 decades. And I think this calls for, for us to actually make a dent in this conversation and actually take some of this conversation more seriously. There is a place for the private sector increasingly to play a more active role in bringing innovative solutions, championing sustainable and dignified access to economic opportunities for displaced communities, and especially the communities at large, but especially for the young people in these communities. Areas like education, making sure that the next generation of young men and women who are currently in camps are getting access to good education so they can have better lives for themselves, for the future, for themselves in the country. Again, over the last couple of decades, I think we also will agree that private sector actors around the world have been speaking a lot around how they can do more to create a more just society, or more prosperous society beyond just profits. I'm not going to bore you with statistics or numbers, but I think we can all agree that, you know, with the introduction of SDGs and ESGs and all the Gs, there's an attempt by the private sector globally to do more in this space. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a controversial comment, but I think it is also true to say that the Africa private sector perhaps lags behind in this conversation. And I think there's more that we can do as an Africa private sector ecosystem to bring more awareness to issues around social impact, issues that benefit humanity, issues that benefit that transcend beyond share value, shareholder value. So with this in mind, we decided to, I guess, probably do something about the conversation. And so, you know, as part of a couple of sessions we're running, this session we are having today is one of 3 or 4 that is going to lead to an event at the end of November, specifically November 30th to December 2nd, focusing exclusively on this conversation around how does the private sector in Africa play a more active role in the areas of displaced people and communities. We are hosting an event that we've themed 36 Million Solutions Africa Private Sector Forum on Forced Displacement. And the objective for this forum is essentially to bring together more stakeholders from Africa, from other countries, friends from Africa, all over the world, to have a shared conversation around how private sector actors who've done this before can share some of the best practices. Private sector actors who want to engage in this conversation can lean into it. And private sector actors who need to be converted, we can do some work to convert them. And not just in conversation and dialogue, but also in commitment. We want to use this event at the end of November, early December as a driver for actually raising funds and raising commitments toward the refugee and displaced community situation in Africa. Excitingly, we are very honored to have as a partner on this conversation, the UNHCR. The UNHCR Private Sector Partnership Office in Africa, headed by Nancy Aburi, have been very, very supportive of this event, and we're very honored to have them on our side. As is the head of the Great Lakes and the Great Lakes region, Clementine, who's also been very supportive. So we are very honored to be in this conversation with the right partner, because no one understands the space better than the UNHCR. And we think that there is a lot that we can all do together to make a dent, and beyond making a dent, to actually do more to bring not visibility, but also to bring an awareness and create opportunities for individuals across the continent. So with this context setting, I would like to hand over back to Valerie. But the conversation today essentially is going to center around, you know, how do private sector actors get more involved around social impact conversations? But we're going to anchor it more on the refugee conversation, because that's what we're passionate about, and those are the conversations that we're trying to have across the continent. Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Valerie.
Thank you, Isaac, for providing the content around today's conversation and highlighting some of the initiatives that we have planned for the year. Our next speaker and presenter comes from South Africa and will be sharing his story as a refugee and as a successful businessman. Said Mohammed is the founding president of the Horn African Social Entrepreneurs Forum in South Africa. As a professional banker and successful entrepreneur, he is a passionate individual keen on highlighting the potential of refugee youth and entrepreneurs, as well as empowering both local and refugee youth to foster a social cohesion and tolerance within the community. Said, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I'll hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Valeria. And I also want to thank Asisa Fauda, who's part of the UNHCR Private Sector Partnership. This is a wonderful session, and thank you, Amahoro Coalition, for organizing and putting this session together. And it's really a great honor that I'm today being invited and sharing my story with you, and perhaps a case study around how does, for example, the private sector builds partnerships with refugees, asylum seekers, and forced people. So to start with, as introduced it, my name is Saeed Mohammed. I am originally from Somalia. So my journey actually began as a young man born into a nation at war with itself, and you know, growing up in that country and that unfortunate you know, background. The situation before the wars, we had a wonderful life and everything were all okay, growing up in a very entrepreneurial family. I was a happy young man, but when the war started and the civil wars and civil strifes get forced many of our people, you know, flee. I then fled Somalia and then moved into South Africa as a young man in 1998. Brought great opportunities for me, but correspondingly a greater challenge as well, because I left my family behind and began a life in which I took full responsibility for all my thoughts and actions and decisions. A daunting thought indeed for a man who had not had many experiences. So upon arrival in South Africa, I matched with other refugees and asylum seekers in South Africa to begin a rebuilding process of what was left of our fractured lives due to the destructive civil wars and civil strifes back home in Somalia. I have been living in South Africa since then. Early years, I can share that early years of coming to South Africa was not really an easy one. It was sort of a torture. I suppose all of us as the refugees, you know, and asylum seekers, missed home with what was left off. So with that and the very long journey that brought me to South Africa, which was very risky, and you know, I had to you know, catch up with the new environment and the new country I arrived. And I am really grateful to South Africa because we were given the opportunity to leave. The Home Affairs gave us the paper, the status that we can live in the country legally, and we were told that the sky was above our heads. That means there was no support whatsoever. We were just given the opportunity to leave the country legally, and that is where we started. You know, and you know, started life together, as I said, and started as a hawker, as a street hawker, and you know, it was really very difficult. But that is how I have started life in South Africa, in Cape Town actually, and I was between Johannesburg and Cape Town, and that took me the next few years. I have done that sort of survival entrepreneurship. And then from there, we made some savings. And I'm trying to shorten my story because I want to go to the case where when I joined the bank. So I did join and actually co-founder of a massive cash and carry, you know, and then that created a lot of employment opportunities for both the local as well as the refugees. And but along all this time I was, you know, working and surviving, I have always trying also to further my studies and study, you know, and go to one of the institutions in South Africa, and which I did. And unfortunately, after 4 years of the cash and carry burned down, and I went back to square one, and I was unemployed and with no income, but because I had the resilience that I built through my journey from all the way from Somalia to South Africa, and I had the confidence that I said everything is going to be fine. So and this is really a very interesting case study I want to share with all of you, and that building partnership with the private sector and and the refugees can actually work. So in the year of 2014, I'm sorry I've not been sharing the dates of what my earlier story. In early 2014, I attended South Africa Broadly Summit, Broadly South African Summit. Broadly South African is a campaign of South Africa that promotes the locally manufactured and goods. So they had a summit which actually got all the government ministers as well as the private sector, including the financial sector, and large businesses come together and discuss around procurement and all those kind of things. So I have attended, and as I was there, I managed to speak to the head of Barclays business banking lady, a wonderful lady, who was heading the Barclays business banking, and then I had a very interesting conversation, and I said to her, there is a very untapped market. The refugees and the asylum seekers in South Africa who are doing small kind of businesses in South Africa are left, the banks do not bank them because they don't have a proper, identity. They have the refugee section 24, which is like 4 years of that the Home Affairs will give you a documentation is that you can legally stay in the country for 4 years. That's section 24. But before that, you start with the section 23, which is more temporary kind of permit that you can stay in as a refugee in the country for like 3 to 6 months. So both section 23 and 24, they don't get bank accounts and all the financial support that all the other like local South African business people are getting. So I wanted to bridge that, and I spoke to now the head of Barclays. Barclays had by then had the biggest share of Absa, and so I spoke to them and said, you know what, there is untapped market, which is really very large and big, and how do you guys bank these communities? They were very much interested, and they said, you know what, we want you to, I don't have much time, but we want you to come up with proper presentation. And that night I went home and I started putting ideas together, and I just made it simple, and I gave the Barclays guys how they can tap into these markets, into these untapped business markets. And interestingly, from February 2014 till July 2014, I was volunteering my services. I will bring, some of these business people into the Barclays Absa head office and show them and say, you know what, for example, these are massive cash and carries that has a 10, for example, that have a startup with 30 million South African rands, which is really a wonderful business, but they can now get access to getting, banking accounts and all those kind of things in order for them to formalize their businesses. And I will also bring people from manufacturing sector. I will also bring property sector, all kind of sector, which are mostly run by the refugees, starting with the Somalis. I've started with the Somali in South Africa, who are very successful business people. So the bank actually understood this great opportunity, and then from that time, that's how also they gave me the opportunity to work, and I was looking after all these business markets across the country, and that relationship is still working today, and many of the refugees and asylum seekers and forced people are now banking, not only with Absa Barclays, but also the other financial sector also understood that this is a very great business area, and they are also tapping into these markets. So I believe, and I'm going to conclude that it can work, really. It can work. Now, many refugees in South Africa are happily banking with this bank, Absa, and they now formalized their businesses, and now they also contributing back towards this country in terms of employment creation, entrepreneurial spin-offs, and even tax returns. And so, and this is the partnership. Had they not get an opportunity to have a business account, they wouldn't register the VAT or value-added taxes, or they could not even formalize their businesses. So I really want to once again say to Amahoro and the UNHCR, thank you very much for organizing such an interesting session, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. If there is any questions, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saeed, for sharing your journey and how you were able to overcome the challenges that you were faced during your time from Somalia into South Africa, and how you were able to set base. We will open up the floor to questions towards the end of the session. And so for now, I would like to hand over to Aparupa Chakravarti, who is the director at Botho Emerging Markets Group, to lead the panel discussion that's planned for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And thank you so much, Saeed, for sharing your wonderful and inspiring experience with us. We really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. As Valerie mentioned, my name is Aparupa Chakravarti. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I will be moderating today's session. And before I introduce our wonderful group of panelists, I'd like to set the stage a little bit for our upcoming discussion. Millennials have a bad rep. We've been accused of killing, or at the very least maiming, a whole host of industries, from doorbells to breakfast cereals to luxury goods. But while the media will have you believe that we do this because we as a generation are narcissistic, immature, and shockingly individualistic, the opposite is in fact true. A lot of millennial consumption, perhaps with the exception of the doorbells, is actually driven by ethical considerations. According to a report by CB Insights, 73% of millennials are willing to pay more for products or services that are sustainable or create some kind of positive impact on the world. When it comes to investing, millennials are twice as likely to make sustainable investments compared to the average investor. On top of that, we're followed by a generation, Gen Z, whose activism and vocalism on global issues, ranging from everything from education to climate change, is nothing short of remarkable. What does this tell us about the future of corporations? That social impact can no longer be a nice to have. That corporate social responsibility can no longer be independent of day-to-day business activities. In an environment of ever-growing social consciousness and scrutiny by savvy, ethical consumers, brands and companies that can truly merge profit with impact will set the gold standard. These will be the corporations of the future. Today, we are very lucky to have 4 individuals with us who have fully embraced the journey of bridging the gap between social impact and corporate profits. We have with us today Chris Sinanu. Chris, if you could turn on your video, please, who is the Chief Enterprise Business Officer at Safaricom and also a member of the Leaders Council at the Amahoro Coalition. Welcome, Chris. Chris is a strong advocate for supporting refugee economic inclusion and has contributed to many initiatives that promote refugee education and entrepreneurship. We also have with us today Mandisa Mathobela, who is the head of stakeholder relations at UAP Old Mutual, where she is responsible for driving the group's ongoing engagements with its primary stakeholders while employing a stakeholder inclusive model across all markets. Over the last 3 years, Mandisa has led UAP Old Mutual's engagement with UNHCR, which includes financial contributions and technical assistance to forcibly displaced communities. Welcome, Mandisa. Jean Byamugisha is our next panelist and the CEO of the Uganda Hotel Owners Association, which is the only trade association for the hotel sector in Uganda, comprising over 600 members. The association, in partnership with the International Labour Organization, has launched the first ever government-endorsed apprenticeship pilot program to train over 100 refugees who will be granted apprenticeship positions in leading hotels across the country. Welcome, Jean. And last but most certainly not the least, we have Ahmed Takoy, who is the CEO and secretary to the board of Kush Bank PLC. Kush Bank has actively supported UNHCR initiatives, including the Ramadan campaign to support refugee education in Kenya back in 2019. The bank's leadership also includes former refugees who benefited from the UNHCR programs and education system in Kenya and later returned to Sudan to occupy leadership positions within the bank. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you.
I would like to start with Eugene, if I may.
Yes.
One of the common reactions that we have received from members of the private sector when we approach them regarding supporting refugees is, how can we support other communities when there is so much need among our own? Yet, you managed to persuade hotel owners in Uganda to commit to employing refugees during the pandemic, no less, and despite the fact that COVID-19 badly affected the hospitality industry. How did you manage to do that?
All right, thank you so much, Aparupa. And sorry. Okay, hello. Okay, sorry, I'm back.
Right.
We had a few things in our favor. Number one is that Uganda is home to 1.5 million refugees. So as a country, we are one of the most welcoming towards refugees. I think our country is one of the few where refugees don't stay in camps, they stay in settlements. So when they come, they have land, they have families, they can carry out some e-commerce, they can, they open up shops, etc, etc. So it was an easy sell because for the most part, many of us have grown up with refugees or around refugee communities. So they have already been part of our environment, of our system. But also because of that very reason, we said, if we do not skill the refugees, then we are creating a problem for ourselves going forward. And it's not just enough to train them in informal employment. We need to start streamlining their employment and skilling into the formal sector. So we did give an example where we said these young people are already part of the communities. They are already doing the small jobs, the plaiting of hair, tailoring, etc. They are already contributing positively to their community. So imagine how much more they would be if they were actually formally employed, structured. Like Saeed said, they have bank accounts, they pay taxes, and they are basically part of the community. Right now, I think you see with the situation in Afghanistan, in Uganda, we just received the first batch of the Afghan refugees who are also coming into the country, because Uganda really has been a shining example. And so we said, it's not enough that we're just a shining example. Now we need to be able to streamline this and make it bigger. We need to have more refugees, as success stories, even for people back home. If we empower them, we are creating an enabling environment, number one, for security in our countries. There's nothing worse than having an unemployed youth in your hands. So give them something to do, something tangible, and then let them also be encouraged to go back home and be able to pass on the skills they've learned. So that was one of the things that was in our favor. The second one was, of course, getting the business community to not just look at the profits, but also the corporate social responsibility part of it. Again, it was not so difficult because many in one way or another have interacted or they know refugees. I know one of the biggest issues that we came about was, how do you address the issue of stigma? For us, it's not as big because we have even certain areas which are designated, that's a Somali village, that is the Eritrean this, and with their different cuisine, and Ugandans patronize them. So it was not so difficult to get the buy-in. Business community was a little bit more difficult, and that's why we had support from development partners who came and said, okay, for year one, let us pilot this. But we also say to make it sustainable, let us go through all the arms of government. So it went to Parliament, it went to Cabinet, it was approved. And we said, for this to work, it cannot be a private sector initiative. Government must show commitment. Government must also invest their own resources. So let us also create the laws, because we don't want, we as the champions of this pilot program, if we leave, for there not to be any laws that support the growth of this project. So that was also approved. So we have the government buy-in, the government support, and then you have the private sector is coming on board and saying, hey, you have the development partners saying, we will fund this. We just need you to give us the space for these young people to come and do the training. And it's amazing, actually, you know, the idea that we have of refugees that you see on TV, you know, people who are broken, etc. When you actually go to the field and you interact with them, they are amazing. They are smart, they have dreams, they have hopes, they have ambition, you know, and they are young people. It was my first time in my entire 38 years that I was actually going to a refugee camp. And I was pleasantly surprised to see how excited they are, how ambitious they are. They have basically, you see yourself in their eyes and you're thinking, but you know, for a stroke of luck, that could be me. So let me also do my part and make sure that they are at the very least, they have a good enough chance to be able to lead as normal a life as possible. None of us know what they've gone through to get where they are. None of us, and the more you hear their stories, the more you're thinking, we should really be doing more. We should really be doing more, even from the humanitarian aspect of it. So we recruited 100 young people from the refugee settlements in 2 different camps in Uganda. And unfortunately, with COVID-19, we have had to push back many of our deadlines for when they should be able to start, but at least we've got the funding available. And the more we talked about this project, the more even the business community got interested, and they said, you know what, if the development partners are going to fund this 100% in year 1, let them give us an opportunity to also contribute, not even just in kind as we already are, but also in finance, because we want to make this a sustainable project. So in year 2, development partners will give us 80%. We will have the business community contribute about 20%. So by maybe in about 5 years, the business community should be able to fully fund something like this. And especially in the case of Uganda, where we see more refugees coming in. So even the Afghan refugees who are coming in, they're now being accommodated in hotels, because we've already now broken that stigma of these are people who are just going to come here and destroy. No. The hotel said, you know what? Bring them in. We will give you accommodation where they can be comfortable. They take their tests, get their biometrics done. As the government looks for an area where to settle them, benefits for the next 6 months, let them be comfortable. So I love that there is a partnership between government and the private sector. And it's the only way, honestly, that it can work, because private sector cannot carry this by themselves. Government needs the support of the private sector. So it's got to be a partnership between the two for it to be successful.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Jean. And some of what you've described about the Ugandan context serves as an interesting contrast to what is in place in Kenya, where we do have an encampment policy in place and we do have very substantial refugee camps. And with those, somewhat more of a targeted approach is required. And my next question related to that is directed to Chris. Safaricom over the years has developed very tailored mobile-based solutions to vulnerable communities, which also includes refugees. And this seems to cover the spectrum from digital learning solutions to e-voucher products that allow refugees to purchase food and essential goods. Can you tell us a bit about why Safaricom has been making these investments? And how do you think it will pave the way for businesses that are perhaps keen to expand into and operate within refugee communities and settlements?
Thank you, Aparupa. Let me start by saying, I mean, at Safaricom, we believe in being a good citizen. And being a good corporate citizen means understanding your environment and knowing and meeting the needs of the environment. Kenya has always played host to quite a number of refugees from Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, rather. And I think as a business, Safaricom has always kept its ear on the ground and had a touch and feel of what's going on. So tailor-making solutions, digital solutions for the refugee population is just a natural for us. But I want to step back a second, Aparupa, to say, look, I believe Safaricom is no different from any other private sector organization. The challenge we have is that in marketing, we've got the concept of AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, action. And I think what there is that there's a lack of awareness from most private sector organizations as to really what the refugee situation is like, the refugee population in the particular sovereign states is, and how they can help. When I hear Jean talking, there's that passion, there's that excitement. I'm doing something, there's impact. And most of us, most private sector people would want to do that. It's just they have no awareness. So I'm very excited when Amahoro takes up this mantle to educate, to create the awareness, because I do believe the interest is there. And once we do that, we can move forward. In terms of the second part of your question about other organizations wanting to, what other opportunities I see for businesses which are keen. I think so far as the awareness is there, the interest is there, you realize that the refugee population, it's actually an economic block, as we call it in Kenya. And there's so much opportunity even if you were not to look at, there's so much opportunity for impact. And most of these private sector organizations want to be associated with something that will bring impact. May I also take this opportunity to say, the other organization apart from yourselves, obviously, who are doing quite a good job on sensitizing private sector would be UNHCR. I think between Amahoro and UNHCR, you are able to sensitize more private sector organizations to do stuff. Which is why I'm also very excited that at the end of this year, there's the conference that you're putting together that's going to obviously help more people understand and hear more stories from the Jeans and the Mandizas of this world. Thank you. Thank you, Aparupa.
Thank you so much, Chris. And yes, I think that sensitization piece is really, really important. And I think, Mandisa, from everything I understand, UAP Old Mutual is a great example of someone who's sort of gone from sensitization to actual action and real commitments. I understand that you guys were one of the organizations that really stepped up your support for UNHCR's work by providing financial contributions and cash-based assistance for displaced communities. And this came at a time when, during the pandemic, a lot of businesses were actually scaling back their spending to focus on, necessities and essentials. And I wanted to ask you, what value do you think businesses derive from continuing to support humanitarian causes in vulnerable communities, even, or perhaps especially during difficult periods?
Thanks, Aparupa, and wonderful to really be part of the conversation this afternoon. The question you've asked me is what value, what does business see in participating in humanitarian efforts? I mean, given the fact that we are all human, first and foremost, the value is exactly that, to play our part, to be a good corporate citizen, as Chris highlighted, and to really contribute to the efforts that we see around us for the betterment of those in our society. We as an organization are dedicated to the provision of financial services, and as a result, we labor to see results in financial inclusion above all things. And it is obvious to us that many displaced persons, refugees, and asylum seekers don't have that inclusion. They're not included as part of the broader financial system. They don't have access to the kinds of resources and solutions, financial services solutions, that many of us take for granted. And I think, as Saeed indicated, there's a massive need for those solutions and for those services. I always say to people, a financial product may not be of sentimental value to you, but what it protects is indicative of the sentimental value to you that sits behind it, whether that's the ability to provide for your family, whether that's the ability for you to to ensure your valuables and your belongings, whether that's the ability to put food on your table or a roof over your head. The ability to use financial services and financial solutions goes a long way in terms of contributing to our overall well-being. And so as a responsible business, we take it upon ourselves to ensure that our voice is heard at the table where we are discussing the role of advancing financial inclusion in all of the markets in which we operate. Old Mutual is a 176-year-old organization this year, and so we've been active on the African continent for a long time. Our businesses across the continent are varying ages, but our anchor and home base being in South Africa is 176, and we therefore consider ourselves to be a African-grown business. And we identify with the need for African solutions to African problems. And I think if you look at that Isaac gave us right at the beginning in terms of the concentration of displaced persons on the continent relative to the amount of displaced persons in the world in general, it's very clear to us that this is a problem that is really high up on the responsibility list of what we as African leaders should be putting our heads together for. Our colleagues in Uganda are putting us under real strain because they are not only after refugees on the continent, but they've gone, gone global on us. And so we really need to pull up our socks and catch up, because it's not a UN crisis, it's not a refugee crisis, it's a global crisis. And as global citizens, we need to step up to the plate and really put our heads together in terms of the support that we provide. In the pandemic period in particular, we've seen how I was going to say tiny virus, but I guess the impact of it somewhat denies me that liberty. So it's clear to see how one virus has turned the world inside out. And we can't hide behind, well, I have a passport in this country and my nationality is this. This is a virus that's really turned the world upside down. And it's not looking at the color of your skin. It's not looking at your economic status. It's not looking at your registration status in a country. It's really pervasive, and it's a challenge that's impacted people living in countries all over the world. And so our decision as Old Mutual to really step up and play our part in terms of supporting UNHCR really came from that need to say that refugee communities are no less impacted than host communities when it comes to the COVID pandemic. Their businesses are no less impacted, their families are no less impacted, their health is no less impacted or in danger. And as a result of that, as we consider where we direct our efforts to, it naturally came right up at the top of our list when we were considering the most vulnerable in our society. So that for me resonates incredibly with the role that business has to play in society. We're not a spectator, we're an actor, and not just an actor, we're a powerful actor. And we need to make sure that we use the leverage and the resources that we have to make sure that we make a difference in the lives of those who need it the most.
That's wonderful. Yes, absolutely, Mandisa. I think what you said about the fact that problems these days are no longer about us versus them, is no longer specific to a particular nationality or race or whatever. These are really global issues that need to be handled collectively. So I think that's very much spot on. I want to pull on a little bit what you said about financial inclusion and direct my next question to Ahmed. Kush Bank has also worked with UN agencies and even other humanitarian organizations to provide cash-based assistance to forcibly displaced populations. You also support the reintegration of refugees into financial systems by providing them with credit facilities. And I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a little bit more about what you see as a market opportunity for financial service providers that are either already serving or who might be looking to serve displaced populations?
Thank you very much, Aparuba. I hope I pronounced well. It's really a great privilege for me to participate this session. Just on the onset, Kush Bank has been in existence for the last, I think, 11 years, and we have started with the South Sudan, the start of South Sudan, and as you are aware that most of the population were displaced initially, and it happened that part of the shareholders are South Sudanese entrepreneurs, and people who started the bank with me were also people who returned from different refugee camps, or who went through this experience of being, stateless. So itself has got some benefits because I had people who have been displaced, who are coming back from Uganda, the workforce, and also we had people who are from Kenya and Ethiopia, and perhaps some people from Sudan. And there was some sort of culture conflict because how people look at business, how people look at time, how people look at the resources were quite different, because also some of the entrepreneurs and leadership of the bank were coming from Europe, Australia, and this was kind of actually gives us an opportunity to analyze and look at actually this market, because we came up with a kind of a strategy that it's important that we enhance the business of people who are coming back to South Sudan. At the same time, on the other side, there is an ethical component that is shared across the bank of recognizing the human capital that is outside, and that is most likely stateless situations. And perhaps some people could say it's helpless, but we don't look at it this way. So, so it's more or less a strategy that, because of the context where we are in South Sudan, the people who are returning back to the country comes with experience, ideas learned from the camp or the country where they were displaced to, and trying to build up a business within South Sudan. So, so we were looking at the two components, looking the value of the initiatives, the business initiatives, and we were also looking at their value themselves in terms of how much can they change the organization and contribute to the goal. So, then we developed a certain market niche, and I've been working with the humanitarian sector. We have been working with humanitarian sector, particularly in terms of facilitation of cash. Kush is one of the banks that sits in the cash cluster group in South Sudan, and we are working now with almost 5,000 displaced people, where we normally give them. We have done biometric system, voucher systems, and of course, this is one component that we support the humanitarian value of the business, which we see it as a market itself. Also, we are looking at the returnees, especially people who are integrating back to the community. We have now about, I think, 180 individuals with an entrepreneur initiatives that are working with us. And of course, we can't say 100% success, but I must say it's over 85% success on credit facility. Giving credit facility, and probably sometimes giving them a letter of guarantee or letter of credit and so on. On the other side, we have also been utilizing so much on the refugee capitals, because currently we have a workforce of 84 staff, and out of these 84 staff, we have 25% people who have basically people who we have supported to some extent in supporting their education in Uganda, Kenya, and also in Sudan. So what the agreement was that we pay the school fees and we give them the internship, and we give them the freedom if they want to continue working with us or if they want to look for other job. So I have currently one of the branch manager is actually people who have gone through that. And what we also found is that the bond between the institutions and these people, because of that historical kind of, what can I say, allegiance kind of, they seem to stay longer with us than people who we have recruited on a competitive background or a competitive venue. So these are things, but I think more importantly, what we would like really to look into it as an institution is the issue of building business on sustainable and ethical approach. Because even now we are developing a product in Canada called Zip Remit, where we would like now to facilitate payments, the refugees, South Sudanese refugees in Canada or US, then technology-wise linked to the bank, and people are able actually to open an account from a distance. I don't want to really forget to mention that in the bank system we are always struggling with this KYC and compliance and identification of our customers. It's really important, but now of course we try to tailor the situation. And currently, people who are working with in South Sudan, the organization normally gives them a card, and those ones that don't have national identity card, we are looking at having this in place. So I don't know how much time we have, but these are the area of the market niche we are looking at. And I must say, just this morning, and just having worked in Afghanistan, I had one of the managers of one of the UN agencies visited me in the office. And apparently I recruited him from a refugee camp in Peshawar. And I was telling him, and when we recruited, we had a problem of getting his identification. He had no certificate, he had no ID. And so I was just talking to him about Afghanistan, and we are kind of, we said, how do we really look into this matter, now that he is now a key person in one of the UN agencies here in South Sudan. These are the things that I think the world is changing with the help of digital management of the business. It's even we're going a step further to see that we are able to identify the person on the face or biometric systems and still open an account for them and do our transactions. And these are things now we are trying to engage with our central bank. Apparently, I also sit as a vice chair in the South Sudan Bankers Association. So we just had a very long conversation, a presentation with IMF yesterday on the banking sector, and after that we went to see that this reintegration, and because they were releasing a significant amount to support the economy. So I think it's something as a private sector we can play policy level as well as also strategy levels as well as operational aspect to see that there is a value for the people who are stateless, and there is a value for what they do. And that value is established to enhance the business goals and to see that there is always a win-win situation all along the line. And instead of looking at that person as a helpless person. I would like to stop here. I hope I've kind of circumvented your Thank
you so much, Ahmed. Thank you for that response. I am sensitive to time, and I do want to make sure that we have a little bit of time at least for Q&A. So I will ask another question, and this one I'm going to direct sort of to all the panelists, but I'm going to request that you keep your answers to less than a minute, please. And the question is this, and it ties a little bit back to what Chris was saying earlier about how there still is a pervasive lack of awareness within the private sector, even about the refugee issue and how they can sort of get involved. So the question is as follows: for organizations that aren't already engaging with refugee communities and haven't even considered doing so, how would you persuade them to make tangible commitments towards this cause. Again, less than a minute, please. We'll start with Jean.
Thank you, Aparupa. There is many ways that we can get organizations. At least I saw from our case, you have to also first start by appealing to make a business case. So I know that that's why I say it's great if you have a partnership with government, because government can offer some tax rebates. So for instance, I think I've seen this in some companies where they get tax rebates from the number of people that they employ. So there is many ways we can be able to do this, but mainly so through CSR, maybe through government programs like tax rebates, but also we must be able to appeal to the spirit of Ubuntu as Africans. We are Africa, we are naturally welcoming. So it breaks my heart when I see fellow Africans, trying to cross the seas to go to Europe, when we can actually create these opportunities for them at home. These are able-bodied young men and women who can be able to build our continent. We're always in tourism, we're always talking about, pushing for a borderless Africa. We should start with things like this. So there is many ways. Let's look at the spirit of Ubuntu. Let us look at corporate social responsibility. Let us look at the fact that it could be us in those shoes. So what are we doing again? We don't know if the situations are going to change in our own countries. What if it's your children that are refugees? What have you done for your, at least to put out the good karma out there, so that somebody will be able to extend a helping hand to your children? And then maybe let's also work with government to see some tax benefits to help companies take on more and invest more in training some of these refugees. Thank you, Aparupa.
Thank you, Jean. Mandisa, over to you.
Aparupa, my recommendation is based on what the colleagues at UNHCR has been incredibly beneficial for us. I think most organizations have no idea of the scale of the challenge when they first engage. And I think by working together with UNHCR colleagues, there is a clear roadmap that's already been created by colleagues who are addressing these challenges on a daily basis. We're a financial services company. We're nowhere close to having the expertise or capabilities that they have, but what we're able to do is to lend our expertise and lend our resources towards the great work that they're already doing. So where you are not sure where to start, they've already done a phenomenal job of driving this and carrying the baton for the world, really. And so they're a great agency to partner with. Another avenue that's been really useful for us has been the UNHCR Women's Business Network in South Africa. It's the first of its kind network in which women executives from different private sector organizations have come together to speak specifically to the issue of displaced persons and refugees, as well as asylum seekers. And that forum's been really useful as well in terms of championing the ability to surface the issues with organizations across the South African private sector. Many of the organizations represented there are JSE listed entities with operations in countries outside of South Africa. And through this network, we've been able to really garner support, whether financial resource support, but also advocacy, which I think is also an understated commitment that's required from the private sector regarding this particular issue. So those are the two that I would recommend if you're looking to start out.
Awesome, thank you. Chris, and then back to Ahmed.
Thank you very much once more. And I think this is a very important, this concept of creating awareness is really critical. And these days, when even you analyze the private sector involvement in governance, is really becoming so much, because just on a light note, the other day we were joking with some friends when I was in outside the country, and we're saying that even US now has given in to the business, Donald Trump being a business person, so they have given in more to business people than perhaps the political component. So my point is that it's important that the private sector engage the government, respective government, and look at the root cause of the accountability governance, because this is actually, the flow. We must, as much as we treat the flow toward the end of the flow, we must also do a lobby on the root cause. And the private sector has got actually a huge voice on this. In terms of policy of the government, as my colleague said, the issue to do with taxations, issue to do with the leveraging about the human resource capitals, looking at basically refugees as appreciating it itself is really a great awareness. So these are the things that I think we should look into it. But I think it's also important that such a platform is done and then is contextualized, because if you talk about refugee plight in South Sudan, you will have more clients than if you talk about it in Malaysia, for example. So I think we need also to contextualize these publications and advocacy approach. And this can also be done through private sector and such a platform, such a great platform, and UNHCR. Of course, I know that IOM and there are a number of other actors that are working. I think it is important that this platform is expanded to the stakeholders and actors, and it is contextualized and given appropriate resource or budget to see that everybody, every institution is aware. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Ahmed. Chris?
I think I'm more practical on the ground. I think get organized tours to the camps. I think one of the challenges we're having is that there's not enough compassion out there and empathy for the refugees. I think if we organized tours to the camps once a month and took 12 corporate executives, I think they'll start to understand the real challenge on the ground, and they'll be able to embrace or start thinking about ways that they could help plug in to alleviate the challenges that the refugees had. I think that's it. And I think, again, I would like to congratulate Amahoro for thinking forward and putting together the private sector conference for end of the year. I think, once we start talking about, forced displacement in such a setting, I think more people will have the awareness and the interest to plug in. And then from there, we'll get the action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And you actually just provided me with my perfect segue to my last question, which I actually would like to direct to Isaac. So Isaac, if you could come back on video for just a second. Isaac, you mentioned at the start of this conversation that Amahoro will be hosting the Africa Refugee Forum towards the end of this year. And I wanted to ask you, aside, of course, from a rich dialogue, what are you hoping will be the tangible outcomes of this event?
Thank you, Apurva, for the question. I didn't think it was part of the conversation, but I guess here we are.
I'm the moderator.
I was enjoying the richness from the thought leaders you have on the panel. Look, before I comment on that, I think it's really interesting listening to your panelists delving into this topic in a practical way, and it warms my heart and makes me very happy when I see 4 African leaders having a conversation about something that impacts the continent in a way that is real. And it's not theory, it's not these individuals who are doing the work, who are in the trenches. So I guess the first outcome that I want to see end of November, early December, is a richness in conversation as we're having practical conversations with thought leaders, with leaders across the continent who are actually walking the walk, right? So they are contributing financially, they are engaged in doing things that policy side. And I think every panelist you have brings a lot to the table. And I think there are more of those stories out there. And I think it'd be great to have that. So that's sort of the first part of it. The second part of it that I think is also real that would like to, would really want to see as an outcome of the event is a real commitment toward refugees and displaced communities. And when I say real, I mean money. So I mean money, right? So this event is also a fundraiser. As I said earlier, we are 16% of the global population, but we are 45% of displaced people living on our continent. And that's a fact. I think our government should get a lot of credit for the work they do with refugees. African governments actually host the highest number of our own refugees, which is great, but hopefully we can solve some of our issues so we don't have to host refugees. And so we don't want to have the conflict in the first place. But be that as it may, I think that government gets a lot of credit for the work they're doing. And for me, for us at Amahoro, I think one of the things I'd like to reiterate is, again, the private sector's role in that. And what that means, the private sector actors can make financial commitments. I want to see financial commitments. I want to see African companies and Africa high net worth individuals committing to refugee causes and the cause of people in this displaced community. We would like to see commitments of advocacy. Africa private sector leaders are very tied in with government. How do we talk to our government to influence policy in a way that creates opportunities for decency and dignified lives for people who are displaced on our continent? Some countries are doing some things right. Uganda, as we mentioned a few times, Uganda is the best practice for this. Others are somewhere in the middle. And the idea is to encourage people to be part of the coalition of the willing to do all the right things that we all need to do to make sure that we create a prosperous future for our continent. So one is money. Second thing is enabling of these advocates. And the third thing, actually is also very, very important, is I think a commitment to providing opportunities. Ahmed mentioned that earlier, but I think Ahmed said something about they're providing 5,000 refugees with either jobs or doing something with 5,000 refugees. That's tremendous. There's more and more those opportunities where private sector actors can say, look, over the next 10 years, we are going to make a commitment to educate 500 refugees in the insurance industry, in the financial industry, in the hotel industry, whatever that is, right? Make a commitment and stick with it. We are going to commit to providing internships to refugees to make sure that they get a practical skills they need. A lot of times, and I don't mean this out of disrespect to corporates, a lot of times it's easy to provide assistance in a way that is helpful, but not always very useful. So it's one thing to say that we're going to donate something to the camp to these people, right? But it's another thing to actually get in the grind and actually, help in a way that allows people to actually, do something to themselves in a way that is respectful and dignified. And I think that's what those are the three things that I think will be fantastic. And actually, a last thing, outcome, is that it's a fun and enjoyable event that we can do this every year and celebrate the work that people are doing in this space. And eventually, one of the things we want to do is set up a fellowship for refugees, have young men and women who benefited from the generosity of corporates and high net worth individuals to come back and share their stories. The story that Saeed's story is a fantastic story. We don't listen to stories for story's sake. We are Africans. We like folklore. We like narratives. We like storytelling. These stories empower us for the next generation. It's what carries us on for the next conversation. So anyway, I know you didn't ask me to go on and on, but those are the kinds of things that I'd like to see that I think would be great, great art. And finally, I would re-say that we are amazingly honored to have this relationship with the right partner. And I can't say enough about the work we do in the UNHCR. The UNHCR is a vanguard for all things refugee. And I think the work they do in refugee communities is tremendous. I think the work that Nancy's team, the PSP team in Africa is doing, I think is tremendous. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to get Africans to put their hands in their pocket to give you money. And the work they're doing to raise awareness, create advocacy, and to get us to contribute to this cause, I think is phenomenal. And we're very thankful for the work we're doing with them. So that's all I got. I promise I'm done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac, and thank you, Ahmed, Jean, Chris, and Mandisa. Really appreciate it. I know we're a little bit over time, but I do want to make sure that we address at least one or two audience questions. So please bear with us a little bit longer. The first question is from Nancy. Oh gosh, I hope I don't butcher your name. Moloantoa, and it's directed to Mandisa. So Nancy says, how have you engaged or mobilized the South African government to support your initiatives, given the regression of democracy and xenophobia in comparison to places like Kenya and Uganda? And then she goes on to ask, how are you dealing with sort of a perceived lack of political will by the government and the fact that they still have the power to influence policy?
I almost forgot about that slight mute/unmute requirement there at the bottom of the screen. But I'm glad we didn't get to you're on mute. So thank you to Nancy for her question. I think it's a very important question, particularly in the South African context. I think a couple of things for us, just to set out this context. From a policy point of view, and from a legislative point of view, South African law is among some of the most progressive law that you'll find when it relates to the our national capacity in terms of being able to host refugee communities and displaced persons. I think the challenge that we have is the fact that legislation and what the state has put out on one sense are very different from what people experience on the ground from a social integration point of view. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done from a social cohesion point of view. Our partners at the UNHCR have been fantastic in terms of being able to navigate that space and really advocating for policy decisions to be advanced and also for policy decisions not to be advanced to the isolation of addressing issues of social cohesion. We frequently engage in multi-sectoral forums in which we invite the government to engage and participate along with civil society actors who are the most active and represented on the ground in terms of host communities and are really the first port of call in terms of responding to the challenges that are experienced on the ground, as well as lobby groups and advocacy groups who are dealing day to day with those challenges. So we found that the multi-sectoral forum is one of the best ways to be able to really advance the cause in that particular respect and invite the state to engage in terms of how they want to really take what is on paper a great plan and put it into practice from a day-to-day and a lived experience point of view. And it's a little bit more difficult, as the state will rightly confirm, to get to the point where the rubber starts to hit the road. And that's really what the big challenge is in terms of ensuring that the experiences of individuals, the experiences of all people in South Africa are experiences that are positive, that are pleasant, and that are advancing the well-being of individuals in our society. And that's work that we've committed to as an organization, but it's also work that is much required for the development and for the benefit of the South African state, because we actually don't have refugee camps and refugee settlements, so to speak. Refugees and displaced persons in South Africa have the right to live wherever they would like to live. And so there's a huge piece of work around social integration that's required. And that social integration across the demographics of the nation. And that work is done mostly hard-earned, mostly step by step, and mostly with the support of not only the government at the forefront, but also with the backing of all the members of the social compact, the private sector included. And so that engagement is active and robust, but the process in terms of securing results has been slow. And I think the pressure is felt on all fronts, particularly when we do have instances of xenophobic attacks flaring up. Recently, there was some unrest in South Africa around some politically related matters, shall I say, from a point of diplomacy. But once again, whenever you find that those political tensions are playing out in society, you often hear that there is the beginning of the deterioration of that social fabric. And so at the top of the list, in terms of the South African National Development Plan, is social cohesion. And together with our colleagues at the UNHCR, our work is dedicated towards advancing those efforts as far as possible.
Thank you so much, Mandisa. I know we're 16 minutes over and I want to be respectful of people's time. So I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to conclude the event. This last question is directed towards Chris. Chris, how do you think that it's from an anonymous attendee, which is why I'm not naming names. How do you think the African private sector entities like Safaricom can motivate other private sector entities to support displaced populations?
I think, as I said, if we champion compassionate visits straight down to the camp levels, I think the thing, we're all human. I think Mandisa said it, that the compassion comes from knowing that you're doing something that's impactful to others. So I think on one hand, it's about when we look at our sustainability as a company, we understand that that sustainability comes from our environment being stable and growing. And refugees are very much part of that environment, and we need to take care of them. I think it's about showing what we've done in terms of time, energy, and money, and encouraging other private sector organizations to recognize the fact that they don't live in a bubble. I saw a not so nice joke yesterday, but it was an important one, which said, if you are in Afghanistan and you thought having a stable or not having a stable government did not matter, now you know it matters, that your environment determines whether your property or determines whether your life and the life of your families are going to, you are sustainable in the place that you are. So I think it's good corporate governance. It's being a good citizen, and it's being compassionate to other fellow human beings. We just have to lead the cause. We just have to show other people, other corporates, how else they can plug in. And so I go back to my marketing AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, action. Let's all help to create better awareness about the refugee situation, and we are able to encourage other people to get onto the bandwagon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. On that wonderfully inspiring note, I'd like to thank all of you, panelists, attendees, partners, of course, Amahoro Coalition, for organizing this wonderful discussion today. It's been an absolute pleasure moderating for you, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aparupa.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us, Aparupa. We'll see you at the end of the year.
Can't wait.
Hey. You guys, Mandisa and I just lost Ahmed. It'd be great to connect with you and Saeed and everyone to talk about this event and how we can do something together. We took together with Philip and with Nancy's office with the PSP guys.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll set something up, Isaac.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Au revoir.
Cheers, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye, Valeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you.